Oh, hello. Get a really quick audio check done. Shouldn't have any problems today. Thank you for joining me on this Sunday. Audio's good. Thank you, Fearless. All right. Hello, Dr. Corey Stern, Mr. C. Didgeridoo. My God, I never can pronounce that. Yeah, we got a real humdinger today. We're going to find out if there's a tater in them onions. You guys know the Archaix approach is to look at something from multiple different perspectives. That's exactly what we're going to do. I was very impressed with the Earth Chronicles when I read them years ago, and I went back to them many times. Zechariah Sitchin woke a lot of people up, providing a lot of value, explaining. He brought to the table. I mean, we had Andrew Tomas, Eric von Daniken. They were pioneers before Sitchin in the 50s, 60s. Ivar Zapp. Many people brought value to the table, but no one had really just put anything together. Not even Eric von Daniken did what Zechariah Sitchin did with the Earth Chronicles. So, yeah, he brought some extreme value to the table. So anytime that we want to ascertain the value of something and to separate fact from fiction, which is what we do in Archaix, we have to analyze it from multiple different vantage points. And this is something that's not done a lot. But I am not someone who's not coming with my own expertise, bringing my own value. Long before I was a YouTuber, long before 4 years ago when I started dumping my research in video format, I had already since 2006 been in publishing. My own book, Anunnaki Homeworld, was written, I believe, right after Zechariah Sitchin passed in 2010. So he had already passed before I wrote this book, but this book still of value. It's a great seller, full of all kinds of charts breaking down the NER, the SAR, the Shar dating system, correcting some of the things that I found as a chronologist that Sitchin got wrong, and also showing what he got right. But one of the reasons my publisher rushed this to publication was because there were hundreds of books about what was going to happen at the end of the Mayan long count in 2012, and I provided charts and chapters showing that those scholars got it wrong. There's nothing going to happen in 2012. The only thing that's going to happen in 2012 is the year 2013 right after it. And I have that in this book because they miscalculated. They weren't chronologists. They didn't understand. You cannot apply a modern day year to a culture that didn't even know a 365.24 year. It's nowhere. They didn't even know it when they developed their calendar. The year was 360 days. In fact, the year was 360 days to every single culture in the world, which leads us to the research of another individual. We're going to get into that. Immanuel Velikovsky in his own books, Worlds in Collision, Ages in Chaos, Earth in Upheaval. So this is what I did is I bridged Zechariah Sitchin and a lot of other, peripheral authors in the periphery of that type of research. Immanuel Velikovsky, Hans Bellamy, Hans Boehringer. You guys know the list. There's so many before us. Thor Heyerdahl, Samuel Noah Kramer, Maureen Gallery Kovacs, especially Professor Sadi. Morgenstern, the Doctrine of Sin and the Babylonian Religion. We cannot omit the research of Sumerologist Professor L.A. Waddell. So this is what I did. My own version of the Anunnaki is based off a tremendous amount of data. My bibliographies are extensive. My research was not done with Anunnaki Homeworld. I had to publish another book, which came out, Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse. It too is packed, showing the return of the object that Zechariah Sitchin so widely published about, Nibiru. I call it the Nemesis X object, and I do that for good reason. And it's because Zechariah Sitchin attached a 2,200-year-old mistake. Even Alexander Heindel published that the 3,600 years for the Shar is an ancient mistake. It was even corrected in ancient times. Just like my many presentations criticizing Graham Hancock for sticking with the 9,000-year Atlantis Younger Dryas narrative. I've called Graham Hancock out many times through his personal friends, through public emails, through video call-outs. I got no response from the man. He does not want to debate that. Neither did Billy Carson, but neither did Matthew LaCroix, neither did Jimmy Corsetti. None of them want to, because they're wrong. I've freely published those data sets to the public so they could see the Atlantis dating is 13th century BC. So on the same token, we're going to do that for Zechariah Sitchin, although I'm a fan. Yeah, Zechariah Sitchin got things wrong, but sometimes those are easy to overlook when you look at the general value they brought to the field. We now have millions of people who are familiar with the Anunnaki narrative. That wouldn't have happened without Sitchin. But we have to correct that narrative because there's errors. My Archaix veterans know where I'm going, but I'm going to be showing you new information I've never showed in previous videos, along with a lot of the older information just repackaged into a much better format. So after those two books, I had to come out with this monster, which is only available on Amazon. My publisher has not republished this yet as a book tree book. This is still an Amazon book. It's huge. Here it is right here. Shocking Secrets of Antiquity. Racial Wars of the Bronze Age. Unusual Artifacts. Technolithic Engineering and the Two Cataclysms that Buried History. 400 pages of amazing data and science. Guys, I was an author, a researcher, and a writer long before, almost 2 decades before I started my YouTube career. So this is another good book packed with information, correcting a lot of the misinterpretations that are out there concerning the Anuna of Ki. This is a very particular branch of people in a pre-cataclysm period that were here on Earth. That's what it means. Of Ki, Ki, means of the Earth. There was another branch that were somewhere else. And you could call it Apsu, you could call it the deep, call it the underworld facilities, all that. So this is my third book on the Anunnaki. And to show those unfamiliar with my material, my publisher published this because, according to him, it's probably the most extensive treatise on the pre-flood world ever published. That's how many sources, that's how much data is in here. And it's all about Anunnaki, and it's all the records and all the things that I have found. And yes, I am correcting a lot of the chronological mistakes that have been made, not just by Zechariah Sitchin. Zechariah Sitchin made many chronological errors. I'm going to explain why and how that came to be, what he assumed to be true when he put the Earth Chronicles together, which has since been disproven. It doesn't change the fact that the Anunnaki were here. It might change who they are, though, and also when these events unfolded. But this is a huge book, massive bibliography, a whole bunch of charts right here in Return of the Fallen Ones. The publisher published. That's my fourth book on the Anunnaki. I never call them the Anunnaki. I call them the Anuna, or the Anuna of Ki, because that's what they're called in the earlier records. Anunnaki was just a Babylonian description, probably based off the Amorite syllabaries. It was Anunnaki was very late. It's the earliest records. They are the Anuna, or Anuna of Ki. Anuna of Gi, actually, G-E. Coffee's so good. If you haven't got your Aaron's coffee, man, you don't know what you're missing. Should have played that little tune for you guys, too. I didn't do it. All right. So it's Sunday. I normally don't do the videos on Sunday. I'm on Saturdays or Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays. But it's okay. All right. So we know that for those of you who don't know, are new to my channel, is I specialize in chronology. I'll give you an example. Like today, right now, as I'm talking to you, I am 18,866 Shars old. That sounds pretty old. Yeah, under the Sumerian sexagesimal day count system, I'm 18,866 Shars old today. How do I know this? Because Samuel Noah Kramer, uh, the Sumerologists that were alive in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s had already figured out the translation of the word Shar. And they understood how Berosus had made critical mistakes. And it was easy for Berosus to make those mistakes 22 centuries ago because Berosus was Greek. And he was trying to, as best he could, outline the events and histories of the pre-flood world with a limited library, limited resources, and 15 centuries after, the Shar was no longer used as a method of reckoning time. The actual literal translation of Shar is a turning. And in its context, it's always referring to turnings of the stars. So remember, timekeeping systems in the pre-flood world were based off the circumpolar stars, 1/3 of heaven, turning around Alpha Draconis, the ancient pole star Thuban, called Eye of the Dragon. The Dragon Draco constellation wrapped around 1/3 of the stars of heaven. And one day was the time it took for the celestial reptile to go around the celestial axis one time. It was a turning, it was a Shar. I know you guys have heard my song dedicated to Billy Carson. A Shar is a day, not a year. I know you guys, man, it's a real catchy tune. This whole video, it's dedicated to Billy. But 18,866 Shars, that's how old I am today on February 2nd, 2025, born June 9th, 1973. So 18,866 turnings of the stars means I'm 51.6 years old. That's what that means. I'm 51.6 years old. On the 365.24 day count system that we're on today, it takes 365.24 days for a whole year to pass. That's how long it takes the whole cycle that we call the year to go. So under that system, I'm 51.6 years old. But under the older system, prior to the existence of a 365-day year, under the lunisolar system of 360 days, which developed out of the ancient Sumerian sexagesimal mathematics, under that year, that's not how old I am. Under that year, I'm 52.4 years old. Under that year, I'm a little bit older than 51.6 years old. Now, under the ancient Egyptian lunar reckoning system, hold on to your britches. Under the ancient Egyptian lunar reckoning system that was heard by Solon when he passed down his information from the priests of Sais in Egypt so that Plato could record it for us. Under that system, man, I'm 628 years old. Man, my bones hurt. 628.8 actually years old under the ancient Egyptian lunar Sais system that Solon heard in northern Egypt, lower Egypt, in the 7th century BC or 6th century BC. Yeah. Under that system, the whole Atlantis narrative unfolded at the same time Athens became a maritime power. Remember, the Atlantis story is about Athens. The Atlanteans sent their navies to go attack Greece, Athens. Well, we already know from archaeology that, and history, and all the Greek traditions and the Greek histories that were left to us, and there's a lot of them, we know Athens was founded about 1365 BC. Well, if Athens was merely founded in 1365 BC, then Atlantis can't be in the Younger Dryas period in 11,000 BC, like Graham Hancock says. It couldn't have happened that way. Whatever was happening in 11,000 BC, it wasn't the Sea Peoples Federation invading the Mediterranean, because that's what the Atlantis story is founded upon. So now, this is the year 2025 Anno Domini. It's exactly 1,503 years after the Dark Age reset in the year 522 AD. It is the only year in all world history. We can count like 20,000 years into the future, 20,000 years into the past, and never does the Phoenix phenomenon on its 138-year timeline ever visit any year of the Nemesis X object on its 792-year timeline. I have whole playlists that show these timelines, guys. If you're new to my channel, I have whole playlists with overwhelming data sets showing that there are 2 cataclysm protocols operative throughout the entire history of the world, and they operate on these two patterns: 138 years, 792 years. Those are my Archaix veterans in the chat. They've all heard these videos multiple times. So 522 AD is the only year in recorded history, and going 20,000 years in the past, that these 2 objects visited in the same year. And in our timeline, Anno Domini, it started the Dark Ages, the 25-year Justinian darkness, plagues, earthquakes, volcanoes, massive human depopulation. The 6th century was the worst century in recorded history to have lived in. In the traditional histories, there may have been some worse ones, like the Great Flood, the Ogygian Deluge, the Gihon flood, and the Adam and Eve reset, the Genesis reset. So this was 1,503 years ago that human race was nearly knocked down to nothing. The reason I'm mentioning this is because all the information we have from previous to that would have been also contorted, misinterpreted, misunderstood. Berosus, there is a reason why Berosus didn't get the details right. There is a reason why, and the reason is because of the Ogygian Deluge. We'll talk about that in a minute, and how literacy collapsed for 300 years worldwide. There's also the Great Mediterranean Dark Age, which by extension was also a Dark Age in India and probably the whole world. That too is a time when literacy collapsed. The transitions from different Minoan linear A, Minoan linear B, the development of the Phoenician alphabet later turning into the Greek, every single one of these is the result of a reset, a collapse of literacy, and someone coming behind, picking up the pieces and carrying the torch further through a dark age into a period of enlightenment. This is the history of the human race, that people have made mistakes trying to figure out what the Sumerian, Akkadian, what the Elamite, Amorite texts were talking about. We can forgive them for those mistakes, because it takes a lot of effort to analyze something from multiple different vantage points in order to put it back together. You guys know, those of you who have been following me for years, you guys know an overwhelming amount of data has been given to you for free. You don't have to order my books. Almost all that data is in my videos somewhere. 870 something videos, and I'm not done. You still have a lot more information coming. But that's because we continue to look at the same things, but from different perspectives to find more out. So this is a Studying calendars and calendrical systems allows us to understand how that these chronographical mistakes were made by our predecessors, why they were made. Well, for general interest, I'll tell you right now. The Atlantis story, 3,159 years ago, 1135 BC, which started the Great Mediterranean Dark Age. That was Atlantis. That's when it fell. Not Younger Dryas period. Not way back in the past. There's no way the Piri-Reis map, the Zeno map, or other maps that show a ice-free Antarctica could possibly exist. There's no way that copies and copies and copies and copies and copies and copies of copies and copies and copies and copies and copies and copies and copies of copies and copies and copies and copies and copies and could ever have survived from 11,000 BC, especially through all of these systemic resets. No. The explanations that are given to us by people who are unqualified to make them, who still sell millions of books and tell us a bunch of bullshit, saying the same thing that all the 2012ers did, tell us a bunch of bullshit, make a bunch of money, and then they're all wrong and they're quiet. You don't hear a peep from them no more. So it's the answer's been staring us in the face. There's no ice on these maps. In the mountains and the valleys and the terrain is all verifiably correct. The cartographers in the 14th, 15th, 16th century got it right. How though? If there's 2 miles high of ice on there today, how do 400-year-old maps not show that ice? Well, if you're being trained in the uniformitarian perspective, like Zechariah Sitchin, like Graham Hancock, then you're going to make assumptions, such as you're forced to believe that those maps are copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. Wait a minute, of copies of copies of copies of copies of copies of copies, going all the way back to 11,000 something, 500, 600 BC. It's absolutely untenable. The suspension of disbelief is more than I'm willing to provide. So something else must have happened. That ice must be very, very recent. And ice ages just might be bullshit. But that's a whole nother topic. It has nothing to do with the Earth Chronicles material right now. You guys know my research on the Phoenix phenomenon. Ice ages are bullshit. The history of our world is punctuated by vapor canopies, not ice ages. We've been told the exact opposite of the truth. So the Ogaigian delusion, 1687 BC, noted for the Avellino eruption and volcanoes all over the world, massive flooding, the total systemic collapse of every dynasty in the world in the month of May, 1687 BC, was exactly 3,711 years ago. The Sodom and Gomorrah destruction. This is interesting because Zechariah Sitchin mentions the Lamentation text. The Lamentation text talk about how something in the sky, this evil wind appeared, the evil wind of the Anunnaki came and destroyed all these Sumerian cities. And Zechariah Sitchin goes on and says, man, it also destroyed Larak and Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, the old Harappan civilization of Pakistan, India was wiped out in the exact same event. Zechariah Sitchin then goes on to correctly say that this is also the event that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. There was 5 cities. I tell you, this is an illustration I tell you guys about errants all the time. Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboam wiped off the map, but the little tiny community of Bela survived intact, untouched. Just like World War II. All chaos breaking out everywhere, but small communities everywhere thrived. Some of them didn't even realize a war was going on. Others did, and they were in the thick of it, but they didn't lose any people. This is what I tell you guys all the time. We do live an insular existence. And the amount of effect that the collective has on you has everything to do with what you contract yourself to in participating. If you're going to be a participant, then you're going to share a lot of what's going on in the collective. If you're going to be a highly individualized soul, then you're basically going to make your world and the world for those you love and your those who are around you all the time. Yeah, this is what life is all about. And the historical record, stories like Sodom and Gomorrah, absolutely provide us examples of this tenet that is promoted all throughout the Archaix research. That we live in 2 different realities at the exact same time, the highly personal and the collective, and we phase back and forth. So Sodom and Gomorrah, Zechariah Sitchin got it right. on the lamentation text. They do describe this evil wind, almost like nuclear, it just lays waste to Mohenjo-Daro. Remember the skeletons that were found holding hands, all looking at the sky, skeletons fused together like glass on the rock. This is what the Russian scientists found. They also found that those skeletons were more radioactive than the skeletons from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I don't know if that's true or not. That's just what's published. I have the books up here. I've shared them multiple times from David Hatcher Childress. So Sodom and Gomorrah, we have shown over and over and over, where it was 1849 BC, which was the year 2046 of the old world's calendar. 2046 is what we're waiting on now for the return of the Nemesis X object. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute. As a cross-calendrical parallel showing that we live in some type of mathematical construct, it does not escape our notice that in 1849 BC, Sodom and Gomorrah are wiped off the map. The lamentation texts are published and written and about the destruction of the Sumerian cities and Mohenjo-Daro and the cities of Canaan, the cities of the plain, by the Vale of Siddim, the Salt Sea. But it does not escape our notice that in 1849 AD, in our calendar, a cross-calendrical parallel, like a mirror image but on a different timeline, a Syriologist in 1849 found an underground library in the Near East. And what was in that library? When they pulled it up and they translated it, the lamentation texts that talk about this massive destruction that happened back then. I got a whole video about this. You can't make this stuff up. Zechariah Sitchin got it right. The lamentation texts were about this massive destruction. It was essentially the end of the Anunnaki age, and the Anunnaki living among men, except as in the positions of rulers of dynasties in different areas. Now, where Zechariah Sitchin and I differ is that I'm showing you guys all the time that the Anuna was what they were called prior to the flood. But after the flood, in traditions and cultural traditions, after the cataclysm, the great flood, they were remembered as Shemsu Hor. They were remembered later as Watchers. They were remembered as Titan or the Titanoi or the Titanese. And they gave birth to the Gigantes, which were smaller. So, and when they reappeared after the flood, among the people of the Near East, they were strangers, but they were taller. And they were remembered very well as the Amuru. Amuru meant they were the Westerners. They came from someplace far in the West. Same thing the Hesiod says of the origin of the Titans. They came from the West. And anytime they got in trouble, they fled back to Tartarus. What does that mean? The far, far West. That's what Tartarus means, the far, far West. So Sitchin never made the connection, as far as I can tell, between the Anuna pre-cataclysm and the Amuru post-cataclysm. That connection is mine. Yeah, and the Egyptian Tamahu, same as the Amuru, Hyksos, all that. So after that event, we have this Babel dispersion. This building of a pyramid and this veiled threat from our controllers never to build one again, the scattering of languages, and what started pyramid building all over the world by survivors who went in all their different directions. This was 3,923 years ago. This is the Babel event. 4,263 years ago was the Great Flood, and this is a major problem that we have with Zechariah Sitchin's material. Zechariah Sitchin, as I'm going to show, ignored every single historical account, every ancient author, every ancient text, all the monumental evidence, every tradition and legend. Zechariah Sitchin ignored every one of them to take the Great Flood event out of where it was placed everywhere by everyone and put it way back into the Ice Age, Younger Dryas period. That's where he put the Great Flood. We'll talk about that in a little while. So, exactly 4,829 years ago, this is the Anno Pyramid reckoning. It was when the Great Pyramid was finished after 90 years or 1,080 months of construction. This year, 2025, is the year 5137 Mayan reckoning. Remember, guys, this book right here shows you the accurate interpretation of the Mayan long count. And the number 5,125, which is what the scholars got, is because they reckoned it by 365.24 days. You can't do that. The Mayan didn't know that number. The calendar round to the ancient Maya was the number 52. 10 rounds was 520. The entire Mayan long count is 5,200 years. It's perfect. How do we know? Because the Mayan only knew the year of 360 days. The 360-day year is perfectly divided into 5,200 years, not 5,125 years that the scholars said when they took the 1,872,000 days of the Mayan long count and divided it by 365.24 to get 5,125, an arbitrary number that forces the Mayan long count to end in 2012 when it does not. When you apply Mayan mathematics, you will find that the Mayan long count ends in 2046 and that it is perfectly divisible at 5,200 years by the number 360. This is a perfect 13 Bactans of 144,000 days each, for a total of 1,872,000 days. This is what my book shows in charts and explains what the Mayan prophecies are and what's going to happen in 2046. The Mayan long count is important because it is a data set that is entirely independent of the history of the Nemesis X object. Totally independent. And yet, the return of the Nemesis X object, what Zechariah Sitchin called Nibiru, as I have shown in multitudes of books, articles, and videos, is 2046. Easy to show. Easy to show. Now, 2025 this year is 5,463 years since the Gihon flood, when 1/3 of the world's population died. When Mr. Enki appears for the very first time with 50 Anuna on a ship and it basically initiates Sumerian civilization. We'll get to that. This year of 2025 is 5919 Anno Mundi. It's since the Adam and Eve Genesis reset, since year one of the pre-flood timeline of 1,656 years that's mentioned in many ancient texts. Also in Genesis, the 10 patriarchs, when you add up their ages and their birthday, all the scholars agree that it is 1,656 years of pre-flood history recorded in Genesis. This year is also 6,063 Anno Luna, since the capture flood, when the moon first appeared in the sky. This is the research of Hans Horberger and Hans Bellamy and Emanuel Velikovsky. This year of 2025 is also 6,333 Anno Phoenix, since the Phoenix timeline began. This is 6,333 Anno Phoenix. And finally, this year of 2025 is the year 7263 Anno Ner. This year, 2025, is 7263, 7,263 years since the beginning of the Anunnaki Ner chronology. The Ner chronology is probably where we need to start in order to get through the Zechariah Sitchin material. All right. So, my Archaix veterans already know this, but those of you new to my channel are probably now saying, what does all this mean? What is this guy talking about? It means all this chronological information I just gave you, which is supported by many published books, hundreds of videos, data sets that I am so confident about. I've been doing call outs for debates on it. This means that 15 years from now will be, in the month of May, the return of the Appen. Zechariah Sitchin wrote about that as well. The Appen was a feared object in ancient times, later called Typhon. The Appen was later called the Phoenix. It will appear in May of 2040. It will be followed 6.5 years later with the return of the Nemesis X object in November 2046. These two are the ancient sky dragons that are mentioned all over the world in traditions, legends, texts, everywhere. They're mentioned by Nostradamus as returning back to back. They're mentioned by Mother Shipton as returning back to back. The phoenix is found in the sixth seal of the apocalypse in the book of Revelation, quickly followed by the third trumpet judgment. These are the two sky dragons that are so popular in antiquity. This May 2040 is what kicks off and starts the Ragnarok. So, as you guys know, all throughout my library here, I've got all these books I got a book 16, 17, 1800s, all 1800s behind me. You guys seen my other library packed with books from the 1800s. We already have a lot of the materials. Zechariah Sitchin, he pulled from a bunch of sources. He pulled from a lot of sources. And all behind me are books from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s prior to the publication of The 12th Planet by Zechariah Sitchin, from which he derived much of his data. So Zechariah Sitchin, while being a pioneer for putting all this together, did not merely invent a bunch of information. The Anunnaki were already a subject of mystery. Now, Zechariah Sitchin, in his very first book, The 12th Planet, he has a theory that the Anunnaki is a race that came to our world from a planet called Nibiru. And they came here because they needed to fix the atmosphere of Nibiru. And the only way they could do that was to mine gold here on Earth. And that after they left, after the Anunnaki were gone, they took the gold that was mined by their servants, humans, their slaves, clones, whatever, humans, and they went back to Nibiru. And they took that gold. And we don't know if they saved their world or not. This is his premise. Now, one of the pieces of evidence that he really heavily relies on is the fact that humans value gold. And that especially in South America, humans valued gold as belonging to the gods, but didn't use it as a currency, didn't use it as money. And when the Spanish invaded, like Pizarro killed Atahualpa, and all the conquistadors went in South America and Central America and Mexico, North America, they stole all the gold that had been left behind because there was so much of it, because the indigenous Native American populations didn't value it as money. That's a pretty compelling piece of evidence, but I say it all the time, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if you're going to promote an idea that a race came from the stars, the burden of proof lies on you. Now, I have been known to quote a few times that we have nothing in the archaeological record that even comes close to anything of residuum left over from capital ships, drop ships, freighters, carrier troop freighters, anything that would show of highly advanced, interplanetary or interstellar space travel. We don't have anything in the archaeological record that even hints to that. We do have technolithic artifacts. I have several videos on technolithic civilization, technolithic parts and stuff like that. But every bit of that is of human provenance, human manufacture. So this is what Zechariah Sitchin promotes. Whether you believe it or not is entirely up to you. I believe the Anunnaki was a race. I believe that they were here, but I believe a more literal interpretation of the Near Eastern text is required, not metaphorical. Because Zechariah Sitchin jumped to conclusions that references to the great deep actually meant space. I don't see that. I don't see that at all. Neither does Samuel Noah Kramer, Thor Heyerdahl, Alexander Heidel, Maureen Gallery Kovacs. The great deep was the underworld, the Apsu. So, like I said, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to go through the chronology and correct it in this video. Whether you believe that an ancient race came from the stars and came here, it doesn't matter of your opinion. It doesn't even matter. It doesn't really even matter to what we're about to correct in this video. But that's the subject matter of the 12th planet, and it lit a fire in the minds of a lot of people. So his second book was Stairway to Heaven. Stairway to Heaven was a book more my speed. You guys know I don't have them in here right now. They're in the other building. You guys know, I'm Archaix veterans. You know that I've got a couple books published on the Great Pyramid, and I've shown things about the Great Pyramid that have never been published in any works before. I show the 138-year patterning, the fine structure constant found all throughout the pyramid, and that the pyramids are a calendar, which was John Taylor and Robert Menzies' theory, which was the astronomer royal for Scotland, Charles Piazzi Smith's theory. Yes, it was something that Sir Flinders Petrie actually wanted to disprove, but his measurements actually proved it. Crazy how that worked. It's also the theory of Adam Rutherford. It's also who wrote Pyramidology. It's also the theory of engineer David Davidson, who put together a fantastic book actually demonstrating it. It's also my theory, although I've corrected my predecessors and shown exactly what the message of that pyramid is in the sequencing of units of 138 and what it means to our world, to history, and to the future, this Phoenix phenomenon, this editing process that we undergo. It's amazing. It's harrowing, amazing, and liberating all at the same time. It totally matters about what your perspective is. So Stairway to Heaven was the second book, all about pyramids and ziggurats, and he brought some value to the table because he showed that the official story of the pyramids is put out that it's a pyramid built by Cheops. Is not true, and that there is a technological sophistication to the structure. Zechariah Sitchin woke a lot of people up to that, how advanced that pyramid really is. So his third book was The Wars of Gods and Men. This was more along my speed because this really, really, really overlapped with a lot of the Archaix research on the Anuna, what happened to them, the post-Technolithic period, which I also in my Chronicon call the shock and abandonment period, and how all these cultures just exploded, but they had access to technology that they didn't really understand. Remember, I've done videos showing the practice molds in South America where it looks like people had access to technology and they were experimenting with it. They didn't quite know how to work it to the sophistication of their predecessors who left or abandoned that technology. So here we have the Wars of Gods and Men. A lot of overlap with Archaix here. So in the Wars of Gods and Men, well, let's see, Sitchin, yes, he delves into the conflicts of the Anuna. This is something that I have theorized as well, that they were not all on board with each other, that there was a faction that was very powerful that had splintered off and caused all kinds of problems, and that normal humans, I'm not saying the Anunnaki weren't human. To me, in the Archaix data, I've seen no evidence to suggest that the Anunnaki are anything more than a very advanced race, and that the whole situation is a cargo cult phenomenon type situation. So I don't see any evidence that they were from space. But that's neither here nor there chronologically. So yeah, it's The Wars of Gods and Men was his third book, and he goes through the traditions and histories and a bunch of cuneiform texts and show that the origin of our political systems, the origin of our governments, the origin of this duality, the origin of all these things that are going on in the world today, that this pull and prod, yeah, it all goes back. It all goes back to the pre-flood, pre-cataclysm period when the Anunnaki were behaving the same way. That's really interesting, though. He doesn't promote the Anunnaki as being gods. He promotes them as being a spacefaring race, maybe even human. Zechariah Sitchin left all that wide open. Yeah, we're not talking about little green men coming from space. So he's promoting the idea that humans on the surface are really no different than the Anunnaki themselves. In fact, this is something that I have brought to the table a lot, and I show that every bust, relief, depiction, and description of the Anuna is of humans. Tall humans with lapis lazuli eyes and beards, something that the Sumerians did not have. They had black hair, black eyes, smooth skin, no hair on their faces. So this is where we get the concept of dragon kings. We're going to be talking about them because we have to talk about the Sumerian king list. So that was his third book. By the time he wrote his third book, Zechariah Sitchin was an international phenomenon. Yeah, it started a whole movement. There's still people in that movement today, hungering, looking for anything else that will comport with what Zechariah Sitchin was saying. So his fourth book was The Lost Realms. That to me was the coolest book. You would think that I would like When Time Began, his fifth book, but I didn't. I'm a chronologist. When Time Began, that book was very hard for me to get through. But the Lost Realms, about South America, India, Angkor Wat. The Lost Realms went into all these other areas outside the Near East, and he was bridging it together. Had the histories of all these different civilizations was Anuna related as well. They had become factuous, took some of their traditions and technology with them, and that descendants of the Anunnaki were living as ruling families among. That's exactly what I promote. But the Anuna later, after the Cataclysm, were called Amuru. And when they had come back in force, they had literally taken over the Hittites, the Amorites, the Elamites, the Babylonians. The Amorite dynasty came in and took everybody, even northern Egypt. Lower Egypt was even, the locals hated them and called them the Hyksos, which was a derogatory term. Shepherd kings, because shepherds were spit upon in ancient Egypt. So we have them, the Amuru dynasties, ruling in northern Egypt as well. That's why we had two Egypts. So the fifth book, of course, When Time Began. The reason this book is not my favorite is because it does violate many of the tenets of chronology. There is a lot of manipulation in this book, and we're going to talk about it here in this video. That's When Time Began. Was all about the origin of all our timekeeping systems and calendars came from the Anunnaki. This is something I talk about in here. I have whole charts showing the origin of all these ancient calendars and how they all started in a narrow, here's a whole history of the world. There's a narrow 21-year period of time where all these calendars began. That's the subject matter of one of my books. So his sixth book was The Cosmic Code. The Cosmic Code was pretty cool. Cosmic Code was about I remember a lot of genetic. He addressed a lot of genetics in there, which is a turn off to me because I don't like to talk about things can't prove. I can't prove anything in genetics. I don't have that lab. I can't see anything that small. I don't know if they make up all that stuff or not. I have no idea. So, well, I do know that you can subscribe to things like 23andMe, and you can turn in genetic material from a dog, and they're going to tell you, oh, well, you might be Lebanese. You might be part Lebanese, part Libyan, and part Palestinian. It seems like they are making up stuff. People have been catching them. There are whole videos out about these genetic family tree deals that are busting these companies with lying. They're charging you a lot of money to run these genetic tests, chase your family tree. Then they fill you up with a bunch of lies, trying to claim that you got all this blood and ancestry in you that you do not. It's nowhere in your pedigree at all. So I don't know. But Sitchin, he goes in and talks about destiny and fate and all these things, these belief structures that were Anunnaki given to men, and men just carried them. Long after the Anunnaki were gone, human cultures just carried these on. So it's pretty good. It's probably the least important of every book he wrote. His seventh book, The End of Days, it's pretty good. It wasn't his last book. I know that Paul Tice, my publisher, Booktree, published Of Heaven and Earth, which was edited. There's some writing in there by Zechariah Sitchin. He wrote a chapter, and he also edited it. But it's a lot of writers that Zechariah Sitchin was impressed by, and so he agreed to the book, and my publisher published it. It's called Of Heaven and Earth, and But as far as the Earth Chronicles go, I think the end of days was the last one. I do not include the Book of Enki in this analysis because the Book of Enki is fiction. He put together, it's like the Necronomicon. He put together all these actual fragments of all these different fragments from Babylonian, Sumerian cuneiform, Amorite, logographic material from Sumer. He just put all this together in the best narrative and format he could, but it is fiction. It's not anything that was ever found. This is put together from hundreds of fragments. It's very similar to the work of Dr. Malachi York. It's very similar. So that's the end of days is book 7, discusses prophecies like the Ragnarok and the book of Revelation and how these basically all have the belief that the Anunnaki are going to return, like the stories of Quetzalcoatl, Varuna, Viracocha, Bokika. I'm missing some. Votan. So all these ancient American and Indian deities that are promised to return in the last days. He talks about this. One thing that's very interesting, Zechariah Sitchin does mention a 216,000 unit period. Now it's 216,000 shars. We're going to get to that because that gets all the more interesting that he would even write about that, compared to what we know with his interpretation of the pre-flood history. 432,000 years. Man, it's a long time. Man, it is a long time. So there are four major things that I'm very impressed with Zechariah Sitchin. 4. Oh man, let me check my chat real quick. Get this coffee going. You guys know, coffee's my gas. So, Zechariah Sitchin was Jewish, and I am most impressed that his chronology in the Earth Chronicles did not at all rely on the Jewish calendar. The reason I'm impressed with that, as I've shown, is I have a video which produces a data set, and anybody's welcome to try to debate that if they want. But the Jewish calendar that we know of today didn't even exist 450 years ago. It was completely made up. So I'm impressed that he did not get caught in that trap of using the Jewish calendar to date any of the things. Now, he did make some critical errors, but using the Jewish calendar was not one of them. So I'm also impressed that despite the massive amount of pressure, he never promoted that 2012 was going to be something big. He never got on the 2012 bandwagon about the Mayan long count. Nor is there a hint anywhere in his research that he thought that 2012 was not the end of the Mayan long count. It just didn't matter to him. It wasn't his area of research. He didn't know about my research. He didn't know anything about that. I had already corrected the Mayan arithmetic and shown that the Mayan long count ends in 2046. He didn't know any of that, but it doesn't even matter. He never got on that bandwagon like so many other authors. Believe me, guys, you wouldn't believe it. I'm letting them make it. But there are people you know of that are very popular on YouTube today that were heavy on that 2012 bullshit. And when it came and went, they just made their excuses. Some of them changed their whole identities. Yeah. It's crazy how much money was made on that 2012 stuff. So I'm impressed Zechariah Sitchin did not use the Jewish calendar. He did not promote 2012 as being the end of the world or even the return of Nibiru. Yeah, he may have, in one sentence, he may have speculated that it was a very, very, very thin possibility. I think he did. Maybe that was in a Zechariah Sitchin article or something. I don't remember. But his Earth Chronicles avoided the topic. So I'm very impressed that he so widely popularized the idea of advanced technology in ancient times. Because I'm talking about it all the time. I'm showing evidence of it all the time. It's in the remember, guys, if something is true today, then it was probably true of yesteryear as well. It's probably true of ancient times as well. It only takes us 200 years to go from horse and buggy to Hadron Collider. Do you really want me to sit here and try to act like that there's no evidence that we've been technologically advanced before? Because we are. The Antikythera computer is a differential geared mechanism, not gears, not like clocks. It is differential geared, very advanced. And it was found from a shipwreck from around 81 BC, found in 1900, cleaned in 1901, in 1902, analyzed and recognized to be a computer. It's not the only one. I got books right behind me, books full of OO parts, out of place artifacts, the research of Jonathan Gray, Forbidden Archaeology, Richard Thompson, Michael Cremo. There are so many good works out there that show you technology is ancient. Hell, right here in Glen Rose, Texas, we got an iron hammer. No carbon in the iron. How did they do that? How is it possible? So it's I'm impressed that he was able to get it socially acceptable that these technological artifacts do exist. So also, I'm impressed because my core research, my very first published book was Lost Scriptures of Giza. The Great Pyramid of Egypt was my principal study in life for like a decade. And it's evident in my first published book, which is literally an encyclopedia of information about the Great Pyramid that has not been put together about the Great Pyramid in any other text. Huge bibliography. I promise you, if you have never come across any Archaix books, the Lost Scriptures of Giza will completely open your eyes up to just how rich the data is that we're pulling from the ancient world. Fourth item that I'm very impressed with Zechariah Sitchin with was that he showed that the Great Pyramid was certainly not of Egyptian provenance, that it's technological. Absolutely. Sitchin did that. Check my chat before I start showing these slides. All right. Oh my God. I don't even know if I'm going to get to the bottom of that chat. Hello, Lacey. Pamela Swan. Got a lot of mods in there today. That's good. All right. So this is where the presentation really begins. I'm sorry we're an hour into the presentation, but this is a subject that we cannot treat lightly. We have to go full tilt because it's an overwhelming amount of data I bring in support of my thesis in this video. Overwhelming amount of data I'm going to show you, most of it in visual form, that Zechariah Sitchin is completely wrong on the chronology. It does not change the existence of the Anunnaki. I support that they existed, but they were much closer in time than 500,000 years ago. I'm going to prove it. So, what exactly is the central premise of Zechariah Sitchin's entire Earth Chronicles? What's the central premise? I'm gonna tell you. It's gonna be easy. That's really easy to explain. So, in the Wars of Gods and Men, and elsewhere, probably mentioned in every one of the books. I don't remember, but the central premise is this: 432,000 years ago, according to Sitchin. Excuse me, coffee getting to me. 432,000 years before the Great Flood, not from now, but before the Great Flood. That's a key component. because 432,000 is highly specific. 432,000 years before the Great Flood, the Anuna first appeared among men. That's the central premise to the Earth Chronicles. This is what Zechariah Sitchin says over and over and over. This is what many other authors, including ones on my walls, including all these other authors, quote Sitchin on over and over and over. Sitchin shows the text where 432,000 Shars before the Great Flood, the Anuna appeared. So let's break this down to its lowest common denominators. Let's correct Sitchin while keeping the Anunnaki narrative completely intact. What is that narrative? A hyper-advanced, technologically advanced, taller race of intelligent beings suddenly appeared among a post-reset devastated culture. And they had technology, they had infrastructure, they introduced learning, they rebuilt civilization, and later they were regarded as gods for what they did. That's the whole premise of the Earth Chronicles. That's it. And this happened 432,000 Shars before the Great Flood. And Zechariah Sitchin is confident that 432,000 Shars is years. And I'm telling you, he's wrong. You gave up coffee. What, Boopster? I gave up coffee. Used to put organic real cream in it only. Boopster, you need to send me an email. I'm going to talk you off the ledge. All right. So 432,000 Shars before the Great Flood, the Dingir, the gods, the Anuna, appeared among men. They came down. Now, you remember, in the Archaix research, I show that all the oldest concepts and cosmologies were that the gods, the watchers, they came down from the holy mountain. Why? Because the entrances to the underground facilities for which this race survives resets is always in the mountains. The high mountains have the entrances, but they're way in underground facilities going through the Phoenix and the Nemesis X resets. Then they come back up. This is exactly what is promoted also by Mother Shipton. Mother Shipton's material, her poem is exact for this scenario. So we need to understand what's going on here, because this 432,000 Shars is also mentioned 2,200 years ago by a Greek of Babylonia studying in the Alexandrian library known as Berosus. Berosus said that before the flood, there were 10 kings, and these 10 kings ruled for 432,000 years. So Berosus seems to have made the exact same mistake. How did this happen? I'm going to show you. I am going to show you. So one of the timekeeping systems that Berosus focused on and was talking about a lot was the Nur. Berosus recognized an ancient calendrical unit of time called the Nur. I'm going to show you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I have to share my screen. Now my presentation begins. All right, share screen. Share my screen. I got to talk out loud, guys, or I'm never going to get it right. All right. So you should be seeing what I'm seeing right now. So the Ner is translated in the Near Eastern text as 600. It was a unit of time. Now, Morgenstern, I have his book. I even did a video on it. It's called The Doctrine of Sin in the Babylonian Religion. I did a video on it showing all the profound material that's in it. The book was published in 1905. It was by the scholar Morgenstern. Morgenstern quoted a tablet from the Near East that said the Anunnaki of Earth, 600. So there's the Sumerian ideogram Ner, Ner, actually means 600. Now, Berosus wrote about the Ner. He mentioned the Ner, and so did many other Greek scholars, 21 to 2400 years ago. Now, the Ner, academia has identified another word that means Ner. It was just used later. That's Neros. So Neros or Naros is linked in the Greek by the Greek academics of 2,000 years ago. Neros is linked to the lunar solar cycle of 360 days, just like the Mayan long count of 360 days. And the Neros was a period of 600 years. Remember, understanding these facts is critical to understanding the true chronology of the Anunnaki. Before the flood, the Sumerian goddess linked to the 7 Anunnaki kings was Neruda, or Neruda. It's literally the Ner in a female tense. That's before the flood. But after the flood, the survivor of the flood is named Neruis, which is nothing but the Ner in a patristic, in a paternal, a male, turning it into a pronoun. So we have this unit of time called the 600 in the pre-flood times, during the matriarchy, during the goddess worship period under the vapor canopy that I'm always telling you guys about. Neruda is feminine. But after the flood, Neruis is male. He is, in Greek text, Neruis is the old man of the sea. Interestingly, remember, Ner means 600, but the flood survivor in the Bible, in Genesis, is 600 years old when the flood happens. You can't make this stuff up. Backyard professor, Sitchin is not getting drilled. Stop it. You must have just got into the chat because I just explained the history of the Earth Chronicles and what they promote, and the few problems that are in there that we're going to correct. But I'm a fan. I'm a fan. The Earth Chronicles were some really good books. So this is Ner 600 right here. So the Anuna Ner equals 600. The Anuna Ner of 600 years is exactly 216,000 days, as proven by fact that the great year was 600 years. This is interesting too, because we have two different things from the ancient world that cross over here. The 600-year period, Ner, was also the great year that's mentioned by many ancient authors, such as Flavius Josephus. Flavius Josephus not only mentions the great year, but he links the great year to astronomy and the building of 2 large pillars in Egypt. Pillars. Remember, in my Lost Scriptures of Giza, I show you the word pyramid is of late antiquity. It's of late antiquity. In ancient times, pyramids were called pillars or columns. I'll show you in this video because we have I have an amazing data drop on you. Even from our Archaix veterans, you're going to have an aha moment concerning the Great Pyramid. So Anuna Nur, which is a Sumerian designation for 600, an ideogram, which identifies the Anunnaki, is 600 years, and it's admittedly 216,000 days precisely. And it is by ancient authors Josephus Alexander Del Mar, a modern-day scholar 100 years ago, Herodotus, 450 BC, Censorinus, this is a scholar like 16 centuries ago, 17 centuries ago, Pliny the Elder 2,000 years ago, D.M. Murdoch, who just recently passed away, Dr. Malachi York, I don't know if he's still alive or not, Dr. Kennedy on the Sibylline year, which was 600 years. And in the Hindu epics of Janam Patri and Godfrey Higgins, I got his huge books back here. I just did a video recently on them. Anacalypsis. Virgil, the Roman poet, Polyhistor, and Eusebius the liar. I have to call him the liar because he lied so much. He still has a lot of value and a lot of truth in what he's done, but when it comes to trying to prove Jesus was right, he lied on so many things, got caught. Academia calls him the liar too. But Eusebius also mentioned the great year being 600 years. So here it is. There's your list. So we have the Anunnaki associated to the number 600. The 600 years is the great year that's so famous in ancient times. It's the great year. But it's also 216,000 days precisely, which is divisible by the Sumerian sexagesimal lunisolar year of 360 days. Everything's starting to come together now. It's all coming together. How Berosus made this mistake. Moving right on. I'm going to post all these charts because you got a bunch of new ones like you just saw. You've never seen those before. I'm going to be posting them on Twitter after the video. I'm gonna post. I got a lot of new ones to post. Let's see what we're doing here. So we're moving right along. Moving right along. So a book that I have done a video on and I've cited multiple times because it's so huge and it's packed with so much good material is right here by John Jackson from the year 1752. This is one of my chronological predecessors. This man here knew his material. This is Chronological Antiquities, or the Antiquities and Chronology of the Most Ancient Kingdoms, from the creation of the world for the space of 5,000 years. This is some amazing material in this book. This is the year 1752. John Jackson. The year is right there at the bottom in Roman numerals. So in this book, John Jackson talks about the Egyptian historian Manetho had seen the Chaldean history of Berosus, who from the most ancient Babylonian records reckoned in 10 dynasties 120 Sars, called Sari here, of 10 years each, or 1,200 Chaldean years of 360 days. From the beginning of the Chaldean kingdom in the antediluvian ages to the universal deluge, we are told right here that Chaldea appeared and was there, and it had a history of 10 kings for 1,200 years before the Great Flood. Keep that data point in mind. (1752), we read, whether Manetho had any other foundation than what I have supposed, for fixing the beginning of Vulcan's reign, just 1,200 years of 360 days each before the flood, and so making it commence 1,072 years after the creation, cannot be shown. But as yet, as Vulcan was a Phoenician deity brought with several others into Egypt by the first Hermes, that would be Enki. Now, 1200 years before the flood, Vulcan appears. Vulcan is a civilization bearer. Vulcan is an architect, a mathematician. Vulcan is in the writings of Senkunayathan, the Phoenician historian, 1000 BC. Here we have a second reference to a very important 1200-year dynasty before the flood. In the Paschal Chronicle, it says, this kingdom of Babylonia and Chaldea was founded by the giants. And so it was in the days of Jared, which agrees to the time mentioned above. The time mentioned above is right here, 1200 years before the Great Flood. Follow me. You're going to have some mind explosions here in a minute. Here it is, 1200 years before the Great Flood. You had a race of giants. This would be the Anuna. The race, they were huge compared to the locals. Remember, I've showed in prior presentations, and you can see in the works of a Sumerologist, Samuel Noah Kramer, you can see reliefs of huge men called Lugalum. The Lugalum were called big men, and they had special privileges. As a matter of fact, I've even quoted ancient Sumerian legislation on my channel when in Akkad they had a problem and they had to create new laws to give to the common people because the common people were multiplying fast, but the Lugalum were huge and they used to take what they wanted. Nobody could oppose them. They were gigantic. They were called the Lugals. One of the heroes later, called Sargon of Akkad, was originally named Lugal Banda. He was a big man, huge. They couldn't be opposed. We've seen reliefs of Naram Sin. Naram Sin he stands 2 heads tall. He stands twice as tall as anybody else. One man killing a whole mountain full of people. Yeah, this is the Lugalum. So here's the giants right here in the Paschal Chronicle. The giants founded a dynasty 1200 years before the Great Flood. Here it is right here. How do we know it was 1200 years? And how do we know that we're getting it right? That Enki and Enoch is nothing but a later Hebrew memory of the Sumerian Enki. How do we know? Here it is, 1200 years before the Great Flood in the Paschal Chronicle, the giants founded a dynasty in the days of Jared. Who was Jared in the book of Genesis? Jared is the father of Enoch. What does Jared actually mean? It means he who descends. Where did the Anunnaki come from? Where did the giants, the watchers, come from? They descended a mountain. But what was their ultimate origin? The Apsu. Where's the Apsu? The great deep. They came from the underworld. So these are all videos I've done in the past. I'm just doing a reminder, showing now the chronology here. So the mention of the days of Jared 1200 years before the flood gives us 3439 BC. As my Archaix veterans already know, as the appearance of Enki, exactly 12 centuries before the flood in 2239 BC. 2239 BC being the Great Flood is the subject of about a dozen of my videos. And I do have a public call out to anybody in academia who wants to argue that the Great Flood of the Bible of Noah was not in 2239 BC. That invitation for debate has never been answered by anyone in academia. And I'm reiterating it right now. If you think you know your chronological material and you think the Great Flood of the Bible was not in 2239 BC, you need to line that shit up because I've been ready for that debate. So here it is with the days of Jared, 39. Days of Jared in Genesis was 1200 years before the flood. So let's move on. Keep this number in your mind, 1200 years. Okay, that's the same citation. So here it is, real simple right here. You see the two Ner on the chart, 600 years plus 600 years. There's two Ner to the Great Flood, the Great Flood being in the month of May, 2239 BC. Remember, I've showed in prior presentations all the scientific and geographical evidence showing that even scientists in 1998 from multiple disciplines all came together and even said in the year 2240 BC, something wiped out almost the entire world. So that's just a data point. I actually have a whole data set on 2239. But here it is. 1 Ner, 2 Ner. That's 1200. 2 Ner is 1200 years. 1 Ner is 216,000 days. What is 2 Ner? It's 432,000 days. But we're anticipating. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Here is the reign of Enoch, who is a Hebrew memory in oral traditions later turned into the books of Enoch of the much more ancient memory of Enki. They are the same. They are the exact same. Enki is the original, Enoch is the copy, the memory. Here it is right here. During this 1200-year period, when Enki would have been there, during the 432,000 Shars, when Enki would have been ruling, we have Enoch right here lined up. What happened during Enoch's reign? The development of all the ancient calendars in the world. There it is within a 21-year period. They all started right then. When did they start? Right there around the 108th year of the reign of Enoch. Who was Enoch? He was an emperor. Read the book of Jasher. He ruled over 130 of kings and princes in the book of Jasher. And his civilization was focused around Akuzan. Akuzan was where? The river Gihon. How do we know it's in Jasher, the river Gihon? Where's that at? It's the Nile River. Even the Egyptian Copts say that the Gihon River is the Nile River. So, the 130 kings of princes in ancient Coptic Egyptian was Sarid. Who was Sarid? He was an emperor who ruled 130 of the nomes of Egypt. What was he known for? Right there next to the Nile River, the Gihon. What did he do? He built 2 pillars to the sky and recorded all the secrets of the pre-flood world, knowing that a cataclysm was coming. Sarid of the ancient Egyptian Copts is no different than Enoch. Enoch is Enki of the Sumerian text. But don't take my word for it. Continue listening to this presentation because we kind of anticipated ourselves. Famous 1200 years before the flood. So Berosus' king list is to the left. Look at it. Olorus, Alaparis, Amalon, Ammonindon, Megalaris, Danos, Eudorakos, Amimsinos. I don't even know how to say that. Atiartes, Zixuthros was the one who survived the flood. If you add up the number of Shars for each one of these 10 kings before the flood, which the book of Genesis just copied, the 10 patriarchs before the flood, and the individual names of the patriarchs are actually conditions, societal conditions of what was going on at the time in the pre-flood world. I've done a demonstration showing you Adam comes from Adamu. Seth comes from the children of Set, which were the children that knew the Phoenix phenomenon material. They were chronologers and they were known to the ancient Egyptians. They later became Shemsu-Hor. Now here we have like the name Methuselah, which was a prophecy. When I die, it shall come. What came? The great flood. The same year Methuselah died, the great flood happened. What was Noah? Noah means rest. He was the rest. What received rest? The gods. The gods received rest. Why? Because they wiped out humanity. This is the subject of the Archaix epic. The Archaix epic says the world was destroyed because of the noise mankind makes. The field is what it's talking about. Humankind had become super populous and it was too much noise. Now, we're going to translate that real quick. This is just from our Archaix veterans. What the Archaix epic is really conveying is that the construct had been forced into a position of where it was going through cache overload. It had to clear cache. Too many humans requires too many reality tunnels, the forging of too many holographic reality tunnels for us to experience as souls moving through the construct requires too much processing power. Without adequate processing power, it had to clear cache. This is what the Great Flood was. The construct cleared cache so that the few remaining souls could now start a whole new world with unlimited possibilities. It's as simple as that. This is what every systemic reset is really about. The construct only has a finite ability, a processing ability. So we have famous 1200 years before the flood. Here are the 10 kings of Berosus. This is where Zechariah Sitchin got his data. That's why it's important to understand that the 10 kings of Genesis that only ruled 1,656 years, the pre-flood duration in the book of Genesis, which is divisible by the Phoenix phenomenon of 138. But in 2,200 years ago, among the Greek scholarship, Berosus recorded that 10 Babylonian kings ruled. He recorded all the Shars, and it is exactly 432,000 Shars. But he thought it was 400. He thought Shar meant year. 432,000 Shars. Zechariah Sitchin did not invent anything. He didn't make it up. He literally copied the mistake of Berosus. And Zechariah Sitchin built his entire Earth Chronicles chronology off a 2,200-year-old mistake. It doesn't mean that the Anunnaki aren't real, and it doesn't mean Nibiru's not real. Concerning Nibiru, I know Zechariah Sitchin had some critics talking about he made up Nibiru. I'm telling you he didn't. On my channel, I have literally showed twice the old book. I have it in my library now. Magicians and Astrologers of Nineveh and Babylon, 1900. It is a book packed full of scholarly debate over what the hell Nibiru was. Yeah. So he didn't make it up. That book was published before Zechariah Sitchin was born. 10 kings, 432,000 Shars. Now, Orientalists, those who study ancient East stuff, they know that there is a tradition that a great year of a day was 600 years, and it was followed by a great year of a night, which was also 600 years, like Kali Yuga being a whole age. Remember, the Vedic system is all divisible by 216,000 days, or years, however you want to look at it, because every Vedic Yuga, 216,000, 432,000, 648,000, 864,000, 1,700, 1,728,000. Every one of them are divisible by 216,000, meaning that the ancient Hindu and the ancient Sanskrit ages and Vedas are also a part of this old structuring from Sumer. Zechariah Sitchin is right. All roads lead to Sumer, which means that all roads lead to the Anuna of Ki, before the cataclysm, before the flood. He's right. It's the same system. It became more and more corrupt over the passage of time. And we're going to show why. We're going to show exactly why it became more corrupt. So here's a mind explosion. In the pre-Quranic, pre-Islamic Arabian traditions, we have stories of a hero before the flood named Ashidad. Ashidad lived 1,200 years before the flood, and he built a special place called Iram of the Columns. This is the pyramid complex. This is Enki, Enoch, and Surid all over again. He built Iram of the Columns. Iram is a root in pyramid. Pyramid literally means Iram of Ad. The Ad are also in the Quran. They are a race of giants who built mysterious monuments all over the earth in the pre-flood world. Ask any Muslim scholar, they will tell you the Ad and the Thamud are the two ancient pre-flood races that are responsible for mysterious stone structures all over the world. Pyramid is literally an Arabic term because the older references to pyramids have them as columns and pillars, just like I showed you in my very first book published in 2006, Lost Scriptures of Giza. Just like Josephus said in Antiquities of the Jews when he said that the Sethites, the children of Set, before the flood built two pillars, and on those pillars they inscribed all the knowledges of the pre-flood world, the past, the present, and the future, knowing that a cataclysm was coming, and so they could preserve their information. The same story. Enki, Enoch, Sarid, Ashidad, Pyramid, it's all the same story. And it all happened in the 1200 years before the Great Flood. The 432,000 Shars, turnings of the stars, prior to the Great Flood. All right, go to the next file. So the reason why these mistakes are made, the reason why these chronological mistakes are made by modern day historians like Zechariah Sitchin is because a single event in the history of the world has not been recognized widely by scholarship. The reason why the Mayan long count was miscalculated to 5,125 days by Mesoamerican scholars, and the reason why they affixed the 2012 date to this calendar when it was all wrong is because they didn't know about this one single event in world history. If Zechariah Sitchin would have taken the research of Immanuel Velikovsky in Worlds of Collision, Ages and Chaos, and Earth and Upheaval seriously, if he would have incorporated Immanuel Velikovsky's research, it would have kept him from making a critical error in the chronological theme that he attached to the Anunnaki, which is a uniformitarian idea of assigning hundreds of thousands of years of history to a phenomenon which doesn't make any sense. The Sumerian cities of Larak, of Bad Tabira, of Shurapak, of Sipar, the library city. There's no way those Sumerian cities lasted for 500,000 years. Zechariah Sitchin literally requires us to suspend our disbelief. These cities would not have lasted 10,000 years. No cities have ever been found that even go back to the alleged Ice Age period. This was a very horrific chronological mistake to assume that the 432,000 Shars was 432,000 years. Terrible mistake. But if people like Sitchin would have been paying attention to Immanuel Velikovsky, they would have understood that all these calendars changed from a single event. The event happened in 713 BC. The sun stopped moving across the sky and then went backwards 10 degrees, stopped moving again before it continued its journey. And this is found in traditions and records all over the world. The effect has forever changed our world. Research of Immanuel Velikovsky and others proves that prior to 713 BC, every civilization counted 360 days to a year. After 713 BC, every civilization within a decade added 5 unlucky or 5 bad luck days. The event concerns the sun moving retrograde 10 degrees in the sky. Velikovsky in Worlds in Collision and Ages in Chaos shows that the ancient year of 360 days was universal among the Sumerian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Vedic, Hindu, Chinese, Egyptian cultures, citing a catalog of ancient authors, including Plutarch, Ctesias, and Egyptian Eber's papyrus. Pliny the Elder in natural history 2,000 years ago admits that the ancient Athenians knew the year to be 360 days. Alexander Heidel, 100 years ago, cites Neuberger in writing that in early Babylonian times, the calendar was 12 months of 30 days each for a 360-day year. This is precisely what you find in Genesis. The month is 30 days. We are even told that the flood lasted for 5 months, and then later we're told that it was 150 days. Absolutely precise. Sir Isaac Newton assures us that the 360-day year was the only one known to the ancient Israelites, that they brought it out of Egypt, that it was the official ancient Egyptian calendar, that at the temple of Osiris, the priests ceremoniously filled 360 bowls of milk a year. It's a libation, the sacrifice to the day. John Jackson in 1752, Chronological Antiquities, I just showed you that book. 360-day year was known to the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the Phoenicians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans, evidenced in writings of Diodorus Siculus, also evidence from the writings of Berosus. So the 360-day year was also known to Zechariah Sitchin, but he never once thought to divide the 432,000 Shars of the Sumerian pantheons, the Sumerian king list, by 360. It would have given him a perfect 1,200 years. And if he would have researched the 1,200 year period, he would have found everything that I just showed you guys about Jared, Enoch, about Vulcan, the Phoenician histories, the 1,200 years of Ashidad, the builder of the pyramids. He would have found out that 432,000 is the number that he did write about, 216,000 Shars. 432,000 Shars of the pre-flood world is 12 centuries. It's 2 Ner. Each Ner is 216,000 Shars. 216,000 is the magic number in calendrics. It's 360 times 60, which is the base number in the Sumerian sexagesimal system. It's 360 times 60 times 6. That's what 216,000 is. 600 times 60 times 6, which was 600 years, the great year, the Ner. All right, so we are going to check my chat again before I continue. Oh no, we got some amazing stuff. Some amazing stuff to look at. So again, I want to show you, this is 1752, Chronological Antiquities right here. It's like 272-year-old book right here, Chronological Antiquities. Got me curious, 1752. Can't be that old. $273-year-old book. All right. 273-year-old research. That's amazing. All right. So in this book, this is what John Jackson wrote 273 years ago. He said, but perceiving that these large numbers of years were uniformly carried on and made use of by the most judicious and learned ancient writers, like Berosus, without any intimation or suspicion made by them that they were fabulous, I judged that they were founded on real and true calculations and only differed from those of other nations in the manner of reckoning and not in the chronology itself. And I found at last with great satisfaction that the most ancient computation of days for years among the Chaldeans, and of months for years among the Egyptians. Remember, I'm 628 years old, according to the Egyptians. Warranted by the testimony of writers of the greatest credit and most conversant in the histories and antiquities of these nations, reconciled all their accounts together, made them consistent with the course of nature and the history of the first ages of the world. John Jackson, 273 years ago, is saying right here that Berosus is right. The number is 432,000. He's saying that Diodorus Siculus is right when he was told of 450,000 Shar period. He's saying that Callisthenes is right when he had calculated like 170, I can't remember what it was, but it was astronomical too. He's saying that these citations of numbers in the hundreds of thousands are absolutely correct. But he's also saying that it is the manner of reckoning that has been lost. Berosus factored those as years. Shouldn't have done that. When it was Shars. Shar means turnings. And because the pre-flood world was a stellar-based system based off Alpha Draconis, the eye of the dragon, and the circumpolar stars making one complete circuit of the dragon, Shar was turning of the stars, which means 432,000 turnings of the stars is only 1,200 years, which matches perfectly with the traditional and mythological records. It's an exact match. Thank you, John Jackson. Ancient historians and chronologists using different systems, some counting days and others using years, came up with the exact same period for the Great Flood. This should open your eyes. 2239 BC for the Great Flood. And you have to understand, only my Archaix veterans know this. My data set on dating the Great Flood at 2239 BC is totally independent and separate from this chart. None of this material on this chart is how I show that the Great Flood was 2239 BC. This is all just ancillary. 2234 BC is the date Callisthenes gets for the start of Babylon, his observations going back 1903 years before 331 BC. Why is this amazing? Because Callisthenes was given a number that was in the hundreds of thousands. But he calculated it as 1,903 years back to Babylon, the start of Babylon. Berosus and I guess it's Critodemus, I don't know, wrote during the Babylonian astronomical observations was 490,000 years. So these two historians, Berosus including, said that astronomical calculations of Chaldea and Babylon go back 490,000 years. But it's not true. It's 490,000 Shars, which is only 1,361 years. So 1,361 years from the start in 3439 BC to 2077 BC, which is just 2 centuries after the Great Flood. 2 centuries after the Great Flood is exactly when Babylonian astronomy would have resurrected after this massive cataclysm. (2240 BC). This is 2240 BC is the same year that a multidisciplinary panel of scientists in 1998 concluded that the entire world had been destroyed. 2240 BC. Epigenes, according to Pliny the Elder, taught that Babylonian astronomical observations dated back 720,000 years. But 720,000 Shars is just 2,000. It's just 2,000 years. So it's exact. It's absolutely exact. Sumerian king list. Oh man. In the Sumerian king list, after the flood, the first dynasty of Kish was 23 kings, ruling 24,510 Shars, or 68.0 years. This means the first dynasty of Kish ended in 2171 BC. Babylon was built during the Kish dynasty. Do you see how important this is? This is ignored by many people pushing the Shar equals a year theory. This is ignored because the Sumerian king list does not stop at the flood. The 7 kings and the 8 king dynasties before the flood end. But after the flood, we have the dynasty of Kish, still measured in Shars. 24,510. Well, if Shar means a year, then that means the dynasty of Kish still doesn't even begin for another 20,000 years from now. Shar can't mean a year. It must mean day. 23 kings can definitely rule for 68 years, especially under the old democratic system in the Near East, which has been proven by many ancient scholars where a lot of the kings ruled for 1,080 days each. 3 years, which proves a 360-day calendar, because 360 times 3 is 1080. So here it is. More proofs that a Shar never meant year. Philo-Biblis, according to Stephen, historian, a Byzantine historian, dated Semiramis II to the period of the Trojan War, and that Babylon was built 1,002 years earlier. So in Chronicon, I show you all the data that dates the 10th year of the War of Ilium, the fall of Troy at 1229 BC. So 1229 BC plus 1002 years is 2231 BC. That is very, very close to the Great Flood. Eratosthenes, chief steward of Alexandrian Library, has 37th king of Egypt, Egyptian Thebes, according to I don't even know how to say that, Dicericus, at the end of the Trojan War and 1008 years after the first year of Menes. So 1229 BC fall of Troy plus 1008 years of Dicericus is 2237 BC. It's 2 years away from the Great Flood. At the bottom, I got a footnote. Semiramis II, Queen of Babylon, dated by Herodotus 520 years before the Assyrian revolt in 712, when Sargon II is killed. Remember, 712 is 1 year after the year changed in 713 BC when the sun went backwards. And the year changed from 360 days to 365.24 days, the same year we have today. So 520 years plus 712 BC is 1232 BC, which is the 7th year of the Trojan War. Plus 1002 years of Philo is 2234 BC, almost exact for the Great Flood. None of these calculations could be possible unless you translate Shar as a day. Denis Diderot in the year 1753, citing the authorities of Pelephadus, Suidas, and Gilbert. Denis Diderot in 1753 wrote, "The solar day was their astronomical year, whence it follows, according to the supposition, that the 473,000 years of the Chaldeans reduce to 473,000 of our days, or 1,297 and about 9 months of our solar years. Even 300 years ago." Yeah, even 300 years ago, guys. Or 273 years ago, or whatever, 272 years ago. Scholarship already knew that the hyperinflated Babylonian Chaldean dating was just that. It was absolutely accurate, but the method of interpretation was a year for a day or a day for a year. We knew this. Zechariah Sitchin made a critical error, and he shoved Anunnaki history far beyond anything that could have ever been historical. There is nothing 400, half a million years ago that would be relevant today. Let's continue. Paleo-Hebrew derived from Babylonian. Shar in Sumerian, very close to the Hebrew word for day. Shah. What? That's real close. Shar in Sumerian is very close to the Hebrew word for day. Shah, whatever. Sounds real close. Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 6 reads that the prophet is to calculate a day for a year. Why would Jewish scribes instruct each other to calculate a day for a year? Because they're telling each other the business. Because they're instructing each other on how to interpret all these ancient texts. How do we know? Because Ezekiel and Daniel were in Babylon when those books were written. That's how we know. Now, according to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, a year for each day, you shall bear your iniquity 40 years. In the book of Numbers, imagine that. The book is called Numbers. In the book of Numbers, chapter 14, verse 34, we're told a day for a year for a day. Rabbi Dosa, in the 4th century AD, said, God's day of vengeance is a year. God's day of vengeance is a year. Here it is. Hippolytus, Bishop of Porto, wrote, I shall make a covenant of 1 week. By 1 week, he indicates 7 years. There it is. A day for a year. In the scripture, it is the last days that lead up to the year of the Lord. Check this out. So Zechariah Sitchin, we're returning to Zechariah Sitchin for a moment. Zechariah Sitchin has the first human, Adapa, born in the 93rd Shar and died in the 108th Shar. If Shars are 3,600 years, like Zechariah Sitchin literally published in the Earth Chronicles that a Shar is 3,600 years. If a Shar, which he copied that straight from Berosus. So if a Shar is 3,600 years, then the first human lived for 54,000 years. The first human, Adapa, lived for 54,000 years. I'm not buying it. There's a mistaken translation here. No one wants to live that long. I'm 51. I can't imagine living beyond 100 years. Now, I'm going to need a change of avatar. 54,000 years. The law of probability almost mandates that you would die by accident hundreds of times in 54,000 years. So, I put total crap up here. All right. If days are Shars, turnings of the stars, then Adapa only lived for 150 years, and that is acceptable, especially under vapor canopy conditions. That's acceptable. That means that Zechariah Sitchin would still be right, that Adapa was born in the 93rd Shar and he died in the 108th Shar. If the Shars are a day, Zechariah Sitchin's still right. It means he lived to 150 years. That's it. So Sitchin wrote that the final 7 Shars before the flood was a period of drought, famine, and pestilence. His own interpretation of 3,600 years to be a Shar means this devastating period before the flood lasted 25,200 years. A totally untenable idea. 7 Shars of 3,600 days means that this terrible period before the entire world was destroyed was 70 years. And that's exactly what we have in the book of Revelation. As I've shown over and over and over, the final 70 years begins during the seals, the breaking of the seals. And that's what we're in right now. Second seal broken April 8th last year. Yeah, those of you new to my channel, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but you need to watch those videos to understand what's going on in world events today. We are in the second seal period along the Greek Olympiad calendar operated by the elite. So, the third fact here. The first recorded element of time measurement in the book of Genesis was from evening to morning, was the first day. Applying the day to the Shar, we find that the Anunnaki appeared not 432,000 years before the flood, but 432,000 days, being 1,200 years between their descent in 3439 BC and the Great Flood, the Deluge, in 2239 BC. This 1,200 years is confirmed in ancient traditions. We've already showed those. Got that? An inescapable fact. Citing Berosus, Alexander Polyhistor wrote that the Babylonians had records going back 150,000 Shars from the beginning of the reign of Alexander of Babylon. Reducing the 150,000 Shars by 360 days a year, we get 416 years. Alexander of Macedon became Alexander the Great when he took Babylon in the year 331 BC. Exactly 416,000 years earlier, King Nabonassar of Babylon in 747 BC destroyed all the Babylonian astronomical and historical records of the libraries within his reach. Let's see something's going on here. All right, just had to look at something. So we find that in interpreting the Shar as a day and not a year, we find that the historical record is absolutely precise. It's precise. Berosus' own data shows that you have to interpret a Shar as a day in order for this to be true. So if it's true in one place in Berosus, then it must be true everywhere else. So the 432,000 Shars of Berosus' 10 kings before the flood is just 1,200 years. Zechariah Sitchin copied the mistake and ran with it and shoved Anunnaki history 500,000 years into the past. So, let's see. Yes, in the historical record, King Nabonassar of Babylon destroyed all the libraries in 747 BC. 416 years before 747 BC. I mean, after he destroyed those libraries is when Alexander of Macedon sat on the throne of Babylon and became Alexander the Great in 331 BC. What is so interesting about that year is that was the exact year of the appearance of a sky dragon. It was the exact year of the return of the Nemesis X object. For those of you who have read my Chronicon, you know this. This proves that Berosus was correct in his dating and that Shars can only be equal to days. Okay. Those of you who know your Bibles are going to love this one. This is proof that ancient Jews in Babylon understood Shar reckoning and hid it in the book of Genesis. So the 10 kings of Berosus are on the left. Here's the 10 kings of Berosus. They're on the left. The 10 patriarchs of Genesis are on the right. The 10 patriarchs of Genesis are 1,656 years, which is divisible by 138, the Phoenix phenomenon number. And the Great Flood on the 1656th year was caused by the Phoenix, anciently also known as Typhon. We have Adam, which comes from Adamu. That means mankind in the cuneiform records. We have Seth, which was the children of Set. Typhon, the children of the Phoenix. Right here, that's Seth. Enos preserves the Sumerian En as an Enki, Enlil. Enos. Canaan is from Kainu, the serpent race. Mahalalel preserves the Vedic, the ancient Aryan Sanskrit Maharishis. Jared comes from the root Arid, which means to descend, referencing the Anuna descending from the mountain. Enoch preserves the Sumerian Enki. Then there's Methuselah. I didn't put it here. It's too much. But Methuselah, according to Finnish Jennings Dake 100 years ago in the Dake Study Bible, the root words in Methuselah form a prophecy, which means when I die, it shall come. And he lived 969 years, and in the year of his death, the great flood was upon the earth. Then we have the ninth, Lamech. Lamech lived in the book of Genesis for 777 years. This preserves the Shar computation. How do we know? Because Lamech corresponds with the ninth king before the flood in the Berosus king list. Ubar-Tutu ruled for 77.7 Shars. It's right here. 77.7 years. How do we know that they preserved the Shar? Because let's look, we're going to look at it. But Ubar-Tutu, if you take 77.7 times 360, that's how many Shars it says Ubar-Tutu ruled. When you divide Ubar-Tutu's reign by 360, you get 77.7. The ancient Jews in Babylon, when they wrote the book of Genesis, saw that, and they corresponded it with Lamech. And Lamech, they made him live for 777 years. I'm going to show you the king list in a minute. Zithyrus, the flood hero. I already showed it to you, didn't I? Let me go see it. Anyway, the 10th king is the flood hero in both narratives. So here it is right here. Berosus king list has Ubar-Tutu reigning 28,000 Shars. Jewish scribes in Babylon in the 5th century BC divided this 28,000 by 360 days to produce 77.7 years. Then attributed this same 777 to Lamech, the counterpart of Ubar-Tutu. This is how Lamech got a lifespan in Genesis of 777. It's crazy. It's crazy, I tell you. All right, let's see here. Let's get... Oh, we're not done. We are not done. Let's see. I'm going to put this right here. Oh, there's another new chart. New chart on an old chart. So you guys can see this is the pre-flood history. You see 3 Nur at the bottom. You see 1,200 years is 120 times 10. The yellow ring right here that you see, this yellow ring is the Sumerian king list. That's the Sumerian king list. The white ring are the dragon kings of China. Both the Sumerian king lists 8 kings that ruled the Sumerian pentapolis of 5 cities, and the dragon kings both had their reigns end at the Great Flood. That's this line here, the Great Flood. So the white ring represents the dragon kings. The yellow ring is the Sumerian king list, and the 2 Nur right here represent 3439 BC, the last 1200 years before the Great Flood. So in the Sumerian king list, we have 8 kings. Algagar rules for 36,000 Shars. He rules Alulim. First of all, there's the Eridu dynasty. There's it's the city of Eridu before the flood. There's a dynasty with Alulim and Algagar. So Bad Tabira is a city. That dynasty had Inmuluana, Inmalgaana, and Dumuzi. There was the Laric dynasty that only had one king, Incipia Ziana or something like that. The Sapar dynasty had Inmi Durana. The Shurapak dynasty had Ubar Tutu. And then, of course, the 10th king who survived the flood, Zithsuthros, however you say his name. Now, I've talked about the Sumerian king list a lot. It's proof that the Shar is a day. The Sumerian king list says that 8 kings ruled for 241,200 Shars. There's no way 8 kings can live to rule 241,200 years. So the interpretation of Zechariah Sitchin is impossible. Even if you want to suspend our disbelief and say that gods are the Anunnaki are gods and they lived hundreds of thousands of years, it's not true. Because if you went by that model, then that means that a king ruled for 48,000 years. There's no way. There's no way. You would die by accident hundreds of times in that period. So we're dealing with a mistranslation. That's it. If you look at 241,200 Shars as days like you're supposed to, then 8 kings ruled 670 years. Same thing Nostradamus said. 607. It says many will die before the phoenix dies. Until 670 years, he will endure. What caused the Great Flood? The phoenix, the typhon. Nostradamus is correct. He even said 670 years. But 241,200 divided by 360 is exactly 670.0 years. It's perfect. Which ended in 2239 BC, which means that yellow circle you see on that chart is the 8 kings of the Sumerian king list. 7 kings ruled their full terms. The 8th king was cut off as soon as he started ruling. So that's the yellow circle is the Sumerian king list. The white circle are the dragon kings of China that ruled for 646 years. Isn't that interesting? Because the Chinese don't have a problem with day year factoring. They tell you straight out, the dragon kings ruled before the flood for 646 years. It's in Chinese traditions. I got them I published that in my Chronicon. So here's the 646 years of the dragon kings of China. They called them dragons because they were dragon-faced. It doesn't mean they were lizards. It doesn't mean they were reptilian at all. Dragon-faced meant you had the ability to grow a beard, which in ancient times meant that you were the signature of royalty. This is why, after the Anuna and Amuru vanished, the pharaohs in Egypt had wooden beards on their faces, because the beard gave them authority of their predecessors, because the Egyptians were smooth-skinned and couldn't grow a beard. The Sumerians were smooth-skinned. They couldn't grow a beard. The beard was a status symbol. Growing facial hair was an ability of the Anuna. And the Anuna are shown in Sumerian reliefs as being bearded and being very tall and wearing clothes, where the Sumerians were mostly naked. So this is what we have. Sorry about that. So 432,000 Shars of Berosus, pre-flood 10 kings, the 241,200 Shars of the Sumerian king list of the 8 kings, and the 646th year of the Chinese pre-flood dragon kings all end at the exact same time, the Typhon flood, 2239 BC. It's right here on this chart. All synchronized perfectly, and it only works if a Shar is a day. So let's X out of that. X out of that. I've been going hard for quite a minute. I've been going hard for a minute, guys, so maybe I need to check my chat before I continue. God forbid I'm boring any of you. So we're getting close to wrapping this up. This isn't going to be a super long video. Getting close to wrapping this up. So we need to address why the confusion about the Shar. Why the confusion? This is something we need to get a good firm grasp on. Need to do something real quick. I think I might have a contractor here. Just a second. 1 second. I keep hearing. Yeah, I'm just staying off the walkie-talkie. Sorry about that, guys. I forgot I had somebody going to get some materials for me. I've been hearing the truck. All right. So let's share the screen. So I need you to see this. All right. So why all the confusion? How could these critical errors be made that modern scholarship, modern researchers would copy them? Now, I'm not talking about Billy Carson. Billy Carson is a Facebook educated copy and paster. I'm not talking about him. Almost everything Billy Carson has ever researched came from Zechariah Sitchin, came from pre-existing materials. No original research. It's all just copy from other people. I'm not talking about him. But Zechariah Sitchin was a qualified researcher. Now, I disagree with his chronological conclusions. I disagree with some of his contextual conclusions, his conceptual, such as space travel and all that. But still, looking at this chart, you can see this massive destruction, 3439 BC. Nemesis X object, Gihon flood, the Anuna appear. They appear right here in 34. This begins 1,200 years to the center of the chart, which is the Great Flood. Total systemic collapse, 2239 BC. Great Flood. Now, why the confusion? I'm going to tell you. On the left side of the line for the Great Flood, we have no written records. We have nothing. On the right side of the total systemic reset, 2239 BC, we have the development of cuneiform. Now we have records being written down, but everything that is being written down after the Great Deluge are post-reset compositions. They are reconstructions of narratives based off oral tradition. Total systemic reset. So we have, after the Great Flood, we have the development of Sumerian culture. We got the Sumerian logography. We got cuneiform, Akkadian or Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, hieroglyphic, Rongo. They all fit a post-2239 BC narrative. Many academics and scholars are trying to push using uniformitarian principles. They try to push these dates further back for the development of writing and all that. No, we have the traditions. The traditions belong in the pre-flood world. The histories belong in the pre-flood world. But the dating of the actual tablets are always post 23rd century BC. Why? I've explained this in prior presentations. Because the pre-flood world was technological and their writing apparatuses existed at the time, but with total systemic collapse, whatever they used for writing was gone, erased. It's no different than the devices we have today. They wrote on tablets. How do we know? Because descendants always copy their ancestors. And we're only talking about a couple 100-year period. So they remembered, well, our fathers and our forefathers wrote on these tablets, and they preserved all their knowledge on these tablets. But the tablets that they used weren't technological, they were clay. It's cargo cult phenomenon all over again. They used what materials and what memory and built things in present time based off memory. So they built tablets, and they started recording things on tablets, but they weren't like the tablets that their predecessors used, which are shown in Sumerian and Akkadian and Near Eastern reliefs when they're holding these little devices. Sometimes they're holding little bags, but the technology was there. But everything, all the statues, all the reliefs, all the actual tablets, everything we have of Sumerian provenance is post-reset. I'm not the only researcher that has noticed that Sumerian traditions don't match the Near Eastern geography. There are no mountains in Sumer. There are no metals. There's no way a metal refinery city like Bad Tabira in the Sumerian text could have ever been in the Near East. Not there. No. The Sumerian traditions are just that. They are memories of a people long after and long removed from another area because of a cataclysm. So Sumer that we know of is just where they settled after the destruction. It's not where those histories happened. So we have the reason why there's so much confusion is because 552 years after the Great Flood cataclysm, another total systemic reset happened. I have 5 videos on the Ogygian deluge in the month of May 1687 BC. I'm not going to beat y'all up with that. You've already seen all those videos. You've heard it. Total systemic reset. Absolute. Look at the chart. Absolute total collapse of literacy. 1687 BC. Then we have literacy. Then we have the Phoenician. The Phoenician is just starting to develop, and we get hit with another whammy. Exactly 552 years later. The Great Mediterranean Dark Age. Atlantis destroyed. 1135 BC. Total 100% collapse of literacy again. When that world starts waking up, we have Homer. We have the Odyssey, the Iliad. We have Theognis. We have Hesiod, Works and Days, and Theogony. Yeah, but they're very mythological. They're very cartoonish because we just endured 350-year long dark age. That's why. You can see right here. This chart here is showing you everything about the existence of written records. That's what this is showing you right here. These lines that you see right here, this chart is from a whole video I did showing a book from the 1800s that lists every surviving text from the ancient world. That's what this chart is based off of. It's a video I did about a 270-year-old book concerning all the surviving texts. And based off the surviving text, that's what these lines are. We only have 4 hits for surviving text prior to 1135 BC. And then we have a bunch of them right here around 800 BC, 776 BC. And then through the 600s and the 500s BC, they grow. And then finally we hit about 400 BC and you got a solid black line here. we got hundreds of ancient texts from the ancient world from then. And then this vertical line is where BC becomes AD. But yeah, that's what this chart represents, the surviving texts of the ancient world. That's why we lost the information, because 200 or 300 years after each reset, we re-educate ourselves. We find vestiges of the past. We find older books and have to translate them as best we can. We look at monuments and pillars and statuary and effigies and reliefs and symbols, and we put the history of the world back together. Over and over and over, we've done this. This is why it can be forgiven that somebody had mistranslated 2,200 years ago that a Shar was a year instead of what it really is, a turning of the stars, one single day. This is why. History of the world's one of resets. And remember, I also just quoted to you 747 BC. King Nabonassar of Babylon had his own Babylonian libraries destroyed. Yeah, that's why all this information was lost. That's why it's been so difficult for people to put all this together. Oh, we're getting close to wrapping it up. So 432,000 years? No, we got to address that. Well, first, we're going to address Sitchin's mistake on Atlantis, the Younger Dryas, the Great Flood. Sitchin published that the Great Flood was 11,000 BC. Absolute error. He's copying the mistakes of his predecessors, which means that Zechariah Sitchin never researched the Great Flood, because if he did, he would have had the data set I have, which shows all these ancient writers, all these monuments, all these books, and all this scientific data that shows the world was destroyed. It was called the Great Flood, even though the whole world didn't flood. It was called that, the Typhon Flood, and it was 2239 BC. Sitchin should have known that, but he never really researched it. It didn't fit with his version of the Anunnaki. So this is what ridiculousness looks like right here. Do you see the small circle right here? This is the historical record. That's the Great Pyramid, finished in 2815 BC, right there, the year 1080 Anno Mundi, the 1080th year of the pre-flood world. Here's 2239 BC, the Great Flood. And then we have Sumer, Egypt, Babylonia, Harappa, China, the Andean, Urubamba civilizations of South America, all of them appearing at the exact same time, right there after the cataclysm of the flood. Right there. Right there. We have Atlantis destroyed right here in 1135 BC. But anybody holding that the Great Flood is the Younger Dryas period, look how ridiculous it starts to look. 6,800 year period. 6,800 year span of nothing. No records, no histories, no nothing. 9,600 BC Atlantis is not supported by ancient authors. It's not supported in chronology. It is not supported in the historical record. It's not even supported in anthropology. Not supported by anything. Just made up. 9,600. The only thing that dates it that is a mistake. Remember, I'm 628 years old, according to the Egyptian Sais priests, who told Solon that Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years earlier. Yeah, that's what they told him. But even scholars in Plato's day, Eudoxus of Knidos, corrected that 9,000 and said it was 9,000 moons, because the Egyptians reckon a year is 30 days. Yeah. While the rest of the world has 360 days a year, as the rest of the world has 12 months a year, to the ancient Egyptians, the year represented 12 years to them. Every 30 days was a year. I just showed you John Jackson's research where he quoted the exact same thing. Philolethes quoted the exact same thing. All about. And Nido, the guy, the scholar I just mentioned of Nidos, I can't remember his name. But yeah, he said 30 days. So the 9,000 years actually becomes 9,000 months, which puts Atlantis in the 13th century BC, destroyed 94 years later in 1135 BC. The Phoenix Cataclysm. Well, we've been through that on other deals. So this is how ridiculous the Ice Age Younger Dryas theory is. There's no history anywhere in this big circle. None. We have no written records, not even traditions. We have nothing for this big circle here. Nothing but Graham Hancock trying to fill it in with a simple mistake made by Solon on 9,000. That's it. That's the only evidence you have for Civilization X going back to 9,600 BC. Graham Hancock leaning on that 9,000 being years instead of months, when all the ancient historians said it was months. Those are different videos of mine. I'm really critical of Hancock. I am. Let's see. All right. So where is this? Okay. So yeah, you can see the two 600-year periods right here. There's the two 600-year periods from 3439 BC, Nemesis X object. Here it is where the Anuna appear. And 1,200 years later, there's the Great Flood, Typhon event, 1239 BC. You can see it all right there. This is why. This chart really exemplifies why we have this massive dearth of information. How modern chronologists can get things so wrong. All this entire chart documents all the destructions in world history, bad destructions caused by the Phoenix and Typhon. None of Nemesis X object is not on this chart. This is just a Phoenix chart. Yeah, it's this is you guys seen this in my other presentations. I'm just showing you here now to show how many times in the ancient world our world has been destroyed with like perfect clockwork. It has predictive value. Man, we're getting close. I think we're getting close. We are. We're super close. So let's look at this real quick. I want to show you what 432,000 years look like. So you've seen this chart. I did this chart in 2022. Nothing's changed on it. This is a chart of the history of the world in many different ancient calendrical systems and epics, cycles, epicycles. It's all here. Mayan long count is here. The Ner, the cursed earth period, Phoenix phenomenon, Typhon, Nemesis X. It's all here. You can blow it up. It's high resolution. As a matter of fact, you can get this chart and hundreds of other charts in the links in the description box. Let's see. So what I want to show you here, this chart covers 7,344 years of world history. 7,344 years of world history is what this chart represents. This is the Archaix chronology of the world history of the world chart, right here. So let me show you what 432,000 years look like. You see my chart of 7,344 years? This chart here I just showed you? Well, here it is when you shrink it. Here it is again when you shrink it. We're losing resolution. Here it is again when you shrink it. Right there. Look at it down here. Super tiny. There it is. I can't even blow this up no more. There it is in the middle, super tiny. That little tiny chart is 7,344 years. That little chart. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Can you still see it? Can you still see it? That little chart way over here is 7,344 years. 432,000 years is almost 500,000 years ago. It is so far into the past that how can we take seriously any claim that any flood is even going to be important, that any race like the Anunnaki is even going to be important, that the world has not been destroyed 100 times in that period of time? How can we take anything seriously that anything of importance would have happened to us today, that's relevant today, that happened 432,000 years before the Great Flood, even if we use Sitchin's dating of the Younger Dryas period, which is bogus? Even if we use that dating, 432,000 years before 11,000 years ago is still so far into the past. There's nothing in the Sumerian, Akkadian, Elamite, Ugaritic, Rashamran, Egyptian, ancient American traditions, texts, legends, and folklore that would have ever remembered any details of any history that would have happened that far back in time. Nor would anything back that far back in time ever be relevant today. No Sumerian cities would have ever been built that would have even been around. Mountains would have been dust in that period of time. It's not just a mistake, it's a terrible mistake. It's a terrible mistake. And it's easily fixed by just saying that a Shar is what the ancient historians said it was: a turning of the stars, a day count system. It fixes everything. But if you want to stick to the 432,000 years of Zechariah Sitchin instead of correcting it, then I'm going to direct you to this little arrow. You see that little black line? That tiny black line right there that I drew. That tiny black, just the width of that black line. My pen mark might even be too wide, but just that little tiny pen mark represents the entire historical record of Earth. The capture flood, the Gihon flood, the great flood of Noah, the Ogygian flood, the entire written record of all civilizations, the whole Phoenix history, biblical chronology, everything we know about Sumer, Harappa, Ugarit, Byblos, Urartu, Egypt, everything, including the whole Star Wars and Marvel universe, is right there in that black line. This is the same chart, removing the superimposed 7,344 chart. Same chart. If you're going to hold to Zechariah Sitchin being correct and that it's 432,000 years, then you're going to have to dismiss the entire data set that I provided in this video. You're going to have to dismiss all these ancient texts and all these ancient authors and common sense that you can verify on a calculator. If you want to hold to 432,000 Shars being years as promoted by Zechariah Sitchin, then every single one of these boxes, rectangles on this timeline, represents 12,705 years for which we have no history. Every single rectangle is 12,705 years for which we have no history. And then suddenly we do. The Anunnaki appeared 432,000 years before the Great Flood. But there's nothing recorded in the interim, in anything, in the entire existence of evidence. Yeah. I'm not dismissing Zechariah Sitchin. I'm dismissing the chronological value of his work, because that's what I am. I am a chronologist. And all my analysis, all my data sets are all chronologically based. It's how I separate fact from fiction. So my last data point, I believe this is the last chart. My last data point on this entire thing is this. You see you see right here, we have the 35th century BC. Even even the uniformitarian structured academia, anthropology, even confirms the interpretation of Shar being a day and not a year. The reason I know this is because it is from the research of archaeology, historians, and anthropologists principally that we know that the 35th century BC is an anomaly in history. So many of these books I've cited in my other presentations, especially in my Anuna Files videos, shows that the 35th century is unprecedented in the history of the world because all of a sudden the domestication of animals, horses, husbandry, gardening, canal works, vast urban planning, the building of bridges and quays, all these things were done in the 35th century, and they have no precedent. In the 35th century, it's almost as if the Neolithic suddenly transformed into a burgeoning, growing urban society, developed society. All of a sudden, the Ubaid culture just disintegrated into the Sumerians. Harappa in Egypt blew up the Urimbaba Valley, Rashamra, Ugarit, Mari, China, Maya, the Olmec, Babylonian, Jericho was built. Cities were built on Malta, Stonehenge, Newgrange. Everything appeared. Everything appeared after the 35th century BC. I'm not making that up. I've pulled that from encyclopedias. I've showed you guys the data. I'm not making up this data set about the 35th century BC. It comes straight out of anthropology. It comes straight out of so many books that talk about this explosion of information and technology and urban planning and sophistication that just suddenly appeared in the 35th century BC. Well, I'm going to have to tell you now, that's really interesting to me because 3439 BC, the appearance of Enki and the Anuna is the 35th century BC. It's exactly 432,000 days before 2239 BC Great Flood Typhon event. 35th century BC is when Enoch is in the book of Genesis, just emerging to start ruling, building, mathematician, prophet, architect, all that. 35th century BC is when Surid is beginning to rule the 130 nomes of Egypt, and he's planning on building the Great Pyramids to preserve knowledge for the future. 35th century BC is Enki, Enoch, Surid, Ashidad. It is Vulcan, all of them. These are all different cultural memories of the same individual who was Anuna, the ancestors of the post-cataclysm Amuru, the Westerners. The idea that they came from underground facilities after a cataclysm isn't something that's without evidence. In Turkey, we have 59 underground cities, starting with the one found in 1962 called Derinkuyu. Huge populations of people could have lived for decades underground. So here we have, and even the testimony of anthropology shows the 35th century BC is when all this happened. It confirms the interpretation of Shar being a day. And there's nothing going all the way back over here to the Younger Dryas period. We have no records, no nothing at all. Let's see. So I'm going to sum up. Let me go ahead and get up out of here. Check my chat. So I'm going to sum up real quick what you need to know. So first of all, I know 2 of the links are in the description box. I need to put the other links for Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse. I need to put the link for Shocking Secrets of Antiquity. These are all my books on Anunnaki. Anunnaki Homeworld. You can a lot of the material I covered. There's a lot more in these books that we didn't cover today, but still, Return of the Fallen Ones. These are my 4 books that cover Anunnaki topics. The main 3 are the big books. The small book is just about 2046, the return of Nibiru in 2046. I call it the Nemesis X object, and you'll understand why. But that's what this small book's about. Now, to sum this video up, we have to understand that Sitchin did make mistakes. It doesn't mean that Anunnaki weren't real. It doesn't mean that they weren't technologically advanced. It doesn't mean that they didn't have some type of infrastructure that kept them from preserving their writing, because we know they did. No writings were preserved. The Sumerian texts are post-reset memory, post-reset compositions, long after the facts. So long after many of the facts were forgotten. So Sitchin's mistakes has everything to do with his mistranslation of the Sumerian word Shar and copying the exact same mistake of Berosus, despite the fact that many ancient historians had already corrected it. So he just copied the mistake of Berosus that the Shar was 3,600 years. So Sitchin has Nibiru coming every 3,600 years. Totally wrong. I show that Nibiru has a periodicity that is perfect, 792 years. Got a lot of data on that for you new people that don't know my research. You need to go to my Anuna files. It's gonna shock you. There's some real eye-opening material in there. So he assumed Nibiru's appearances were aligned with this 3,600 year Shar interpretation of Berosus, and that was a mistake. He made a mistake doing that. So Sitchin employed uniformitarian dating to claim the 432,000 Shars. His 432,000 years kind of lines up with the uniformitarian model of the development of humankind. It's the uniformitarian model of anthropology, and it's bullshit. It's total bullshit. But Sitchin lined up his Anunnaki theory with the anthropological uniformitarian idea of slow development of humans. So Sitchin's big mistake to me was that he ignored every chronologist or chronological text, chronological historian, ancient writers, the chronologies posted in ancient authorship. Sitchin had to ignore everybody in order to promote the 432,000 years and to promote the Great Flood as the Younger Dryas period. So, promoting 11,000 BC ignored every single flood tradition, every ancient author who talked about the flood. He made a big mistake assuming ice ages are not just mere theory. Promoting ice ages as real. I have a problem with that. It's still a theory. Ice age is still, that's why there's 58 or 59 theories that all promote ice age, but it's never been proven as fact. And it never will be. Not as long as there's maps going around showing ice-free Antarcticas. Yeah. Now, he ignored the fact of the Piri-Reis map showing Antarctica and what that means. Yeah. Just because he mentioned the Piri-Reis map doesn't mean Zechariah Sitchin's right. He actually mentioned the very evidence that collapses his theory. So it's it's just he should have took it to the next level and thought it all the way out. So he did ignore the fact that the Mayan calendar was a day count system, because many of the ancient calendars were day count systems. And if he would have taken that in consideration, he would have understood that Shar was a day. He ignored the Anunnaki Ner period of 216,000 days, because if he would have really analyzed the 216,000 day cycle of the Ner, he did say that 360 days times 60 of the Sumerian sexagesimal system times 6 was 216,000, but he never took it any farther, because that was an ancient Ner, 216,000. And it was a great year. He should have put this together. The ancients said a great year was 600 years. Oh, but in the Sumerian text, 216,000 days was 600 years. Well, 2 Ner would have been 432,000 days. It would have been easy to figure out, but instead he went with the mistake of Berosus. That's what he did. He also, by going with that mistake, another mistake Sitchin made was he ignored all the traditions on a 1,200-year period before the flood, like I showed in this video. He ignored that. He would have known instantly that 1,200 years was 2 Ner. And that 2 Ner was 432,000. That would have opened his eyes up to, wow, 432,000 years can't be it if there's a 1,200-year tradition out there that's known, because that's 2 Ner. and that's 432,000 days. He ignored the testimony of archaeology that there are no advanced civilizations, no advanced cultures in this world before the 35th century BC. He ignored that. Another mistake Sitchin made was not taking into consideration his contemporary Immanuel Velikovsky's stunning research on the great change in the calendar from 360 days to 365 days. He should have took that into consideration in his chronological research, and it would have opened his mind. Another huge mistake. It just shows that he's not a chronologist. That's it. Zechariah Sitchin has his value, but he was not a chronologist. And a case in point is that 2123 BC is the date that Zechariah Sitchin published in the Earth Chronicles that Abraham was born. Yeah, I've got a problem with that. 2123 BC would be 8,877 years after 11,000 BC. Do you see the problem here? Zechariah Sitchin dated Abraham at 2123 BC. He dated the Great Flood at about 11,000 BC. The difference is 8,877 years. You don't see a problem with that? Do you see any evidence that Abraham of the Bible, the patriarch of Islam, the patriarch of Christianity, the patriarch of Judaism, was born 8,877 years after the Great Flood, and yet in all the Jewish and all the Hebrew traditions, he's only within 300 years of the Great Flood. As a matter of fact, Flavius Josephus specifically said that Abraham was born in the 292nd year after the flood. Zechariah Sitchin was Jewish and he knew his people's traditions and histories. Why he jumped from the 23rd century BC, where all Jewish accounts have the Great Flood, to 11,000 BC is a mystery to me. But there's more distance in time between his dating of the Great Flood at the Younger Dryas to the birth of Abraham than there is from the birth of Abraham to us, because that's almost less than 4,000 years. Yeah, 8,877 years between the Great Flood and the birth of Abraham. And that's in Zechariah Sitchin's books. That is a massive chronological error. It just can't even be reconciled. So his mistake is he ignored all earlier scholarship that widely published that the years of the ancient world were days. Zechariah Sitchin's another mistake he made is he promoted the precessional cycle of 25,920 years as something the Sumerians knew about. I already have a video showing you the zodiac is not old. The zodiac and astrology of ancient Sumer was very different than the Greek solar zodiac that we have of Gemini and Taurus and Libra and Virgo and all that. The astrology of ancient Sumer dealt with totally different star patterns. Totally different. And there is no knowledge. No one can pull out. No ancient texts say anything about a 25,920 year period. You will never find that in an ancient text. No one knew about some cycle of 25. It's a modern Golden Dawn society promoted idea. Trying to turn all the zodiacal houses into great ages of the world. It's unknown in the ancient world. I'm not saying it's not a thing. It could have become a thing in the construct with all these people believing in it now. But in prior to Ptolemy, no one knew of such a phenomenon, such a cycle, such a way of. That's why I'm critical of Graham Hancock going to Göbekli Tepe, looking at an effigy of a scorpion and ignoring all the other effigies and saying, well, that's Scorpio, and that means this is like 10,000 BC. Man, come on. Yeah, the Sitchin was basically following other authors talking about the precessional cycle of 25,920 because the ancients didn't know it. And of course, Sitchin's biggest mistake to me is his absolute failure in identifying the Phoenix phenomenon. Yeah. How did you miss all the references to Typhon and the Phoenix? Many of the things he said belong to Nibiru don't. I show in the Archaix research there are two bodies of evidence, completely separate. The Phoenix phenomenon and the Nemesis X object Nibiru, totally different. And yet Sitchin even referred to the Appen, which later became Apin, later became Pin deity, it later became the Fiend, it later became Phoenix. He mentioned the Appen in the Babylonian records, and in Babylonian astrology was fascinated with the Appen. They even named their astrology after it. Astrology in ancient Babylonia was called Mul Appen, M-U-L period Appen. The Appen was the Phoenix. It's what they were always watching for, something that darkened the sun. In ancient China, it was the darkening of the sun that told them what the mandate of heaven was. It was time for the emperor to be banished, killed, or whatever. It was a change of dynasty. So anyway, he muddied the waters between Phoenix and Nibiru quite a bit. So Sitchin has a lot of critics because his translations of words do not match those of like Thor Heyerdahl. Thor Heyerdahl's accounts of the Anunnaki are very mundane. They were just a mariner race that was technologically advanced that showed up in the 35th century BC and amazed the locals, which had no infrastructure and no technology. It was cargo cult. Thor Heyerdahl basically describes cargo cult phenomenon before cargo cult phenomenon was even described by like David Hatcher Childress and others. So Maureen Gallery Kovacs and Samuel Noah Kramer, Alexander Heidel, Professor L.A. Waddell, all their versions of the Anunnaki are very different than Sitchin's. None of these versions have anything about space travel and all that. With Sitchin, I do agree on the Apsu that there was interchange, that the Anunnaki were going back and forth between the Apsu, but it wasn't space. It was the underworld. And that the Edens were walled gardens and fortresses that were regarded by the Neolithic peoples as places of paradise. Edens, because that's where everything was, food and all that. Just like cargo cult phenomenon in World War II, when the U.S. soldiers gave the local Pacific Islanders gum and cigarettes and T-shirts and hats, and they loved them for it. These are awesome amenities they got. But cargo cult phenomenon had the local Pacific Islanders trying to emulate the GIs once they had left and the war was over. Now they're out there building runways. Now they're out there using sticks and getting them on fire and waving, hoping that an iron bird from the sky is going to come and drop them goodies. So it's cargo cult phenomenon all over again. So the Earth Chronicles is pioneer. It's pioneer earth-shattering research. It woke a lot of people up to the idea that we have been technologically advanced before. But I'm telling you now, if you're still hanging on to, let me stop sharing, stop screen. All right. If you're still hanging on to the idea of a lot of the chronology being way 500,000 years ago and all that, you're going to have some real problems with trying to reconcile that model with anything else that's being researched today. There are many good researchers in the field today. I'm only one of them, and they're providing a lot of good value to this type of research, but you're not going to derive anything from it if you're going to hold to that antiquated and erroneous model of a 500,000 year history from the appearance of the Anuna, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. It's dead wrong in the historical record and in the textual record. Berosus made a mistake. Zechariah Sitchin copied it and ran with it. It's as simple as that. Yes, he provides value, but there's a lot of mistakes. That's my presentation. I'm not going to go any further on it. If you want to know more about the pre-flood world and Anunnaki histories, and you want to know more about the Nemesis X object and the proof of its return in 2046, then just for free, watch my channel. Watch my channel, look at my Anuna Files videos, look at my Phoenix Phenomenon playlist, and it's going to blow your mind, the data that's in these videos for free. And if you want to go deeper, you want to have things that are shareable, then just order my books. It's all there. But that's my presentation, guys. I kept it under 3 hours. I sure did. Sure did. It's awesome. Get you some of that Aaron's Choice coffee. Oh man, look at it. Aaron's Choice. I believe these mugs will be on the coffee website. Not the merch website. Where you buy the coffee is where I think you get these. Pour that down. Don't bother me tomorrow, guys. My team and I are going to be pretty deep in office in the next three or 4 days. We got a bunch of predictions to do for our subs. We got to start looking at some sports stuff and start having fun with it. That's what we got to do. So remember, I did have an announcement. Remember, March 30th, March 31st, April 1st, April 2nd. Yeah, it's all about Vegas. The whole Archaix community that's going to participate, we're going to be in a casino. In July, we're going to do a meetup in Kansas City. Sometime in October, hopefully earlier October, we're going to do an Archaix camp out. We're going to rent the whole campground, Glen Rose State Park. Probably be there for 3 or 4 days camping. Go check out the Creation Museum, the hyperbaric chamber. Go check out that fossilized iron hammer. Go check out Giant's footprints. Go check out all the huge 3-toed footprints that are in the Paluxy River Valley. The whole place is fun. What happens in Vegas isn't going to stay in Vegas. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you share it with those, especially in your Anunnaki face group. You know, Anunnaki. There's a lot of Anunnaki Facebook groups. Remember, I was trying to educate Billy Carson back in the day. You know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I was on Facebook trying to give Billy Carson the business, and I was doing it politely, just trying to, hey man, this is wrong on the Shar dating and all that. Here's how you correct it. Here's the Kish dynasty. Check it out. The Kish dynasty didn't get founded 20,000 years in the future, bro. It's right here. It's right here. It's just remodel. That man had me blocked from all like 12, 13, 14 groups that he was moderating. When Billy Carson was coming up, he was all over Facebook trying to get popular. And you know what? He did it. He did. He rose, you know, the brighter the torch, the quicker the burning. He did rise to the top, but he did it censoring and editing people out and not wanting to come to the table. And you know what? That's what happens. That's what happened to him. It's crazy. I don't even want to talk about him right now. That man's been taking a beating lately. So good. See, I got some special videos lined up for you guys. Got some pretty good stuff. We do have to do a Q&A pretty soon. But meanwhile, yeah, share this video with those who are still holding on to the Anunnaki narrative and they want some fresh material. They want some material that corrects the mistakes because it's still valid. It's still relevant. It's just, you know the Archaix position. You know that we are the Anuna. We are the very descendants of the very civilization that we keep studying, thinking that we're independent of it, and we're not. We are the descendants. And we've lost that knowledge through reset after reset after reset. Yeah, man. So it's time for me to give me something to eat. All right, guys. Love you.